Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. When I read a text from Chinese, I'm never quite sure about the pronunciation of anything. I will say the Tang Dynasty because that is just generally how we would say things in English. However, in Chinese it would not be so. And just with a whole slew of names, it goes that way also. So there is a story about Wang Huiche's idiosyncrasies. I don't quite know how to say that, but in the old days, people would have said Wang. In fact, I went to school with a kid whose surname was Wang. That's what everybody said. Of course, my name in the old country would have been Novak or something like that. We just say Novak here. But anyhow, this kind of hair splitting doesn't mean that much to me, and I hope it doesn't to you. But this is an old remnant from my days in Taiwan as a young man, a very marvelous book. And now let me read to you about Mr. Wang's idiosyncrasies. Wang Huiche once lodged for a short time in an empty house belonging to another man. He ordered bamboos to be planted there. Someone asked, "Why take so much trouble when you are staying here for such a short time?" Wang merely recited poetry for a while, then pointing at the bamboos, asked, "Can one live a single day with this gentleman?" One night when Wang Huiche was living in Shangyin, there was a heavy fall of snow. Upon waking and opening his door, he ordered wine to be served. He gazed around at the expanse of white and strolled up and down reciting Chou's poems on a hermit's life. Then he suddenly remembered Tai Kui, then in Yen County, and set out that same night in a small boat to visit him. The journey took one whole day, yet when he reached the door, he turned back instead of entering. Asked the reason, he said, "I set out on a happy impulse. Now that mood is over, I am going back." What need was there to see him? Some truck action outside. Well, I guess I will just continue on. Yesterday I watched a video by MJ at Reading This Life, wherein she proclaimed her intention to become solidly a mood reader for the forthcoming year, as opposed to having plans, ambitions, that kind of thing. I think the dichotomy is a little bit false, but we all tend to use it. Most of us really are mood readers, I think, unless there's some kind of specific goal we have in mind. So having read that story, I just want to talk about how my year is going so far. Today is January 6th in the morning, so I have not gotten my full day's allotment of reading done, but I am making wonderful progress on the 3 major works that I have started, and so I just want to talk about that a little bit. I decided to show my 6 copies of B. Traven's Jungle Cycle. It's a set of books dealing with the mahogany plantations and just in general life for the Indian community in Mexico, as word would have it in those days. He likes to chase this stuff. And The first book is Government. In a previous video, I mistakenly identified that one as the first book, but this is it. Last year, I read The Death Ship by Traven, which was his first novel, and it was an inferior novel to this. Being his first, you would expect that, but still, it was one of the high points of my reading year. And so I decided to plunge in and read the Jungle Cycle, or the Mahogany Cycle as it is known, because I've had the books for a long time. I don't know when it was that I first discovered Traven. The first book of his that I read was The White Rose, and he's an unusual case. He proclaimed himself an American. His writing reads very much like that of an American, but he couldn't get published here. And so somehow he made translations into German and was first published in Germany. So there his books became an inspiration possibly for the White Rose Society. The White Rose was the first novel of his that I read, a very brilliant expose of oil exploitation down in Mexico. And when I first discovered him, I remember contacting Library of America and suggesting, why don't you put out Traven's books? He's, I would say, the greatest unsung American novelist. And they got back to me, well, some people don't like to think that he's an American author. There's no proof one way or another what he is. And so there are theories around that he's somebody else. I don't know what the story behind his Americanness might be. It's possible that he came over somehow when he was 2 and so did not have the citizenship. We see that kind of situation a lot here. But be that as it may, we don't know. Possibly one day somebody will figure it out. But I think it goes without saying that the works read like they were written by an American. They are American novels. But Library of America expressed hesitancy. Oh, we're not sure about that. I think they were just a little bit afraid of it. Number one, they don't want to put them out and have egg on their face, so to speak. But also, I would suppose that one of the reasons that Traven wasn't able to publish here initially was because he, to quote a phrase from William Butler Yeats, he took a cold eye on life, on death, something like that, the phrase that Yeats had chiseled on his tombstone. And he most certainly did. Any of his books, you will note that immediately. He does not shy away from any of the economic realities behind the characters about whom he writes. And I am happy to say that so far, Government, which introduces the whole Mahogany region, is, as far as I can tell, a masterpiece. I'm at page 140. He's rubbing himself against the base of the thing, and it's sort of precarious, but I think we're okay. God knows, when it comes to novelists, Library of America prints editions of much worse writers than Traven. But regardless, I have the books here. I am embarked. And so this is a case which puts me in a position similar to that of Mr. Wang with his idiosyncrasies. I decided late last year, well, I might as well just embark upon the jungle cycle. And so I've started the first book. It was a mood decision, but I'm going to try to just push through all 6 novels and before moving into anything else. It's very much a set plan, and all of my 3 streams of reading for the start of the year are kind of fixed in place pretty solidly. But nevertheless, it is still, the origination is a mood inspiration to read these things. So I don't know that I will be having a lot to say, because I don't particularly care to talk about books by just revealing the plot. But just to let you know that if you want to read this whole cycle, you would start with Government, which is absolutely brilliant. In fact, I'm only 140 in, but, what is it, about 230 pages maybe. Let's see. There was an interesting... Sorry, I didn't pick any of this out. Oh, here it is. Men get indignant about idle gossip only when it is a question of gossip between women. But when they themselves get together, they can beat 6 fishwives at the game. A man thinks his wearisome gabble is intelligent discussion of political and economic questions, and considers the chatter of women as senseless rubbish. But looked at impartially, the rubbish talked by men is no better or richer in ideas than the rubbish talked by women. The topics are slightly different, but the aim and result are as alike as a Ford and a Dodge. So that little figure of the comparison between the Ford and the Dodge really is the kind of thing you find in Traven that suggests to me that he indeed is American. I should put that back here. So that's one stream, and it's going very well. I'm enjoying the novel very much. The only thing that I don't like about it is that it looks like Chapter 9 is much longer than the other chapters. Chapter 10 is the last chapter. I like to have short, sort of evenly lengthed chapters as much as I can. I don't like it when there's one chapter that's way longer than the rest, but probably there's a lot of action going on in that penultimate chapter, and so if that's the case, I understand, but it shows so far no sign of the sort of wobbliness that the first novel did. So that is progressing very nicely. And I don't see any good cause as yet for me to abandon any of this. At some point, if you just let go of the mood whenever you felt like it, you might only read one sentence and then set aside the book and read one sentence from another book. So it's not bad to have a little bit of concentration and what they used to call stick-to-itiveness. even though the initial impulse is a mood impulse. Okay, I've talked enough about that. Let me go into the next stream. This I am reading Parkman, Francis Parkman, The History of the French and English in North America, Library of America, and it's following on my reading of Henry Adams' History of the Administrations of Jefferson and Madison, which occupied a good deal of my time last year. So I read a little bit every night. And volume one, there are 4 books in this volume and there are 3 books in the other. The first book is divided into 2 parts. A shorter part of something like 140 pages. And I have finished the first part. And then the second part is like 300 or something, or 200. This whole thing is about 1,400, maybe 1,300 something. And my year, so today is the 6th. The signal sounded on the morning of January 1st. The gates opened and I have been out on the course, flying ahead in my 3 streams. That's not to say that I won't stumble. A horse will sometimes trip up by sticking its hoof into some kind of gopher hole or something like that. I should assume a well-tended track would not have those. Other kinds of ruts are possible. Regardless, I don't need the horse racing metaphor. Anyhow, it's not very good. I think horse racing is a bit of a cruel sport, regardless. That's how we look at things. Our ancestors did not see it that way, possibly. But while Parkman's book is much longer than Henry Adams', I don't know, much longer. Both of them are 2 volumes, but you can see right off the relative thickness of the books. His history writing is very different to that of Henry Adams. Parkman is writing kind of the potboiler of history, and so it's the type of history that I don't like. The men get off the ship and they walk up the beach and the sun is glinting upon their swords. Well, that's not historical. That's picture painting. I don't care for that as history, generally speaking, but in this case, I really enjoy it. He reads like, from what I have heard, Livy is supposed to read like. I have read 50 pages of Livy, but don't remember too much of Livy. But for me, the comparison, and viewers who are interested in history and might have an interest in this topic should know this. He reads, in my experience, more like, or most like, The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas. It's just a real page-turning thing. And so I have leapt ahead at a greater clip than I would have done, than I did ever with Henry Adams. And so it comes to a case where, like, I was about to finish part 1 last night, and I had 15 pages to go. And in the case of Henry Adams, there's no way I would have done that. I would have said, I'm too tired, I can't do it. But with Parkman, it's a very different story. So I don't know how long it will take me to get through this and what I will do if I do finish it before the year is out. But if you are a reader and the topic of his history appeals to you, it's definitely worth trying. You might be able to get it from a library, although I found the copies pretty reasonably. But it's, for a person who is a reader, it's pretty easy reading. I had seen this, I think, years ago when I was in Evanston. I used to work there as a young man and saw them on the shelf and thought, whoa, that looks interesting, but it never occurred to me that I could read something like that. Well, it turns out 40 years later or 35 years later, I can. But I've got 3 years of reading under my belt now, and so I am making progress. So that is how it goes with Parkman. And then the third major stream has been K.C. Chang. And I've talked about my history with reading history. As a lad, I picked this up at, I think it was at Crocs and Brentanos, and read it. I like his reading style, very archaeologically based, although I see in stuff about him that Chang was a anthropologist, but very heavily archaeology dependent, everything which he writes. And I like this. I read it even twice when I was rather young and didn't get much out of it. Oh my goodness, I never even noticed this. Those 3 lectures by Li Ji that I read make reference to this, and I looked it up. And I didn't realize I had this image on the cover of K.C. Chang's book. This is very, very notable. Oh man, this is great. And it's a different view from the one that I hunted down and clipped on online. But back in those days, you were kind of stuck with what you could find, and that was what I could find on China. So my first historian was Moses Finley, or M.I. Finley. My second historian was Bernard Lewis. And my third historian was K.C. Chang, even though he was an anthropologist. But he put history into his books. And I have to say, now that I have become more familiar with the history of China, based solely on the first 3 books of the Harvard Imperial China series, written by Mark Edward Lewis, I understand more now. I understand the through line of Chinese culture better, but I also understand that fairly uniquely among world civilizations, particularly of, say, Bronze Age, there is so much written record pertaining to ancient China that it's just really quite remarkable. Mark Edward Lewis was an author that I also found way back in the day. This was the book I picked up. Now I'm not sure if this was the one I found at the Crocs and Brentanos or it was the K.C. Chang one. One's memory just sort of invents things. And this was a very good book. Another book which I read twice and possibly should reread sometime now that I'm getting more conversant with sort of the idiom of ancient China. I recently picked this up. So also in my sort of wheelhouse of interests, if you will. Actually, anything by Mark Edward Lewis I recommend, but particularly those first 3 volumes in the Harvard series. He begins with Qin and Han, and then goes into a period between states, and then the third volume is the Tang Dynasty. So it gives you a good overview. This year, if I finish all of my Chinese stuff that is part of my first salvo into the year's history reading, trying to line up with Historathon, a booktube event. If I finish all of this, or if I just decide to abort, as Mr. Wang did, the idiosyncratic Mr. Wang, then I intend to continue with the Harvard series. The last 3 volumes, so it's 6 volumes total, are written by other authors besides Mark Edward Lewis, but they are all edited by Timothy Brooke, I think. So I thought that I would just go into read my third stream, which is the early Chinese stuff. Now, this is the hard reading, if you will. Traven is not hard reading at all. And as I say, Parkman is not hard reading either, to a person who reads. If you have never read a book, that's a different story. I mean, I've taken 3 years to build my reading prowess up to a certain level. And I am not by any means a strong reader. So, he's standing on my books is the problem here. Okay, he's, I was going to begin with this book. I've had this book for a long time. I bought it at Great Expectations up in Evanston. And it's the revised and enlarged edition. It's really a lovely book, and I may have even tried to read it once when I was young and just did not get anywhere. There's a really nice illustration of the different vessels, and if I can find it, I'll show it to you. I'm sorry, I should have had all of this stuff marked out. Well, I'm not finding it. Well, I guess I'll just show you a different set of illustrations. There's a really wonderful full-page agglomeration of all of the different vessels, nicely etched with their names. So I was planning to embark on this, but I learned that, well, not so much that I learned, but I had seen it once in the stores years ago, that there was a final revised edition of this. I think this might actually just be the second edition. So the dates are probably not going to help me because it would start with the first one, but I thought, well, instead of this, I should order the final edition. Even though coming from the 1980s, it will still be outdated. And you have to realize that archaeology, especially the archaeology of China, is a field that has changed so rapidly and continues to change so rapidly that one is better with more current sources. But in my case, it doesn't really matter. What do I need to be up to date for? And then this is the writer whose writing that I really like, so I want to read him. So I've been reading this. It's a compilation of essays. Somebody clipped a book review of the book. I'm not sure from what, but I have not read it. I may look into it. So there we go. You already saw the cover, so you don't need to see that. So there are 9 chapters. And today I am in the middle of chapter 8. So I am making good progress, even though it is the hardest read of them all. And they're of varying degrees of interest. So let's see if I can read this. No, there's no way I can read it. The beginnings of agriculture in the Far East, China toward urban life, urbanism and the king in ancient China, towns and cities in ancient China. The first 4 chapters were really interesting, hard to read to a degree, but then number 5 and number 6, the lineage system, and 6, it talks about dualistic, dualistic phenomena, but it follows on the heels of the lineage system, and that was hard. That was just brain-racking stuff. But then number 7, back to food and vessels. That's gotten back to something pretty interesting. And then number 8 is a classification of myths, beginning of the world myths, or the one where the world is supported on pillars upon the back of a turtle, that kind of thing. I don't really care for myths, but if you're dealing with this old material, that's what you've got to work with. So I'm content well enough with it. So I decided to start with this, waiting for the revised version of the book, the Archeology of Ancient China to come. And it was good that I did that. I had thought about reading this and then just at whatever chapter, switching horses midstream, so to speak, and going with the final edition. This is the 4th edition. Now, it says revised and enlarged, but this is actually false. This book is shorter than this book. They removed a couple of chapters, or he removed, whoever. This is Yale University, I think. Yeah, Yale. And all of these books, which I will be talking about, are Yale. Chang was apparently, although I don't know if that very first one was, very much published by Yale, though I believe he taught at Harvard. And I posted a picture of a little bit from his preface, and I probably should read that. It kind of threw me for a loop. This edition of the Archeology of Ancient China bears very little resemblance to its previous reincarnations, since it has been rewritten from the ground up. The first major change is that in this edition, I no longer intend to cover the whole field and cite every last available reference. The framework is flexible enough, I hope, to accommodate new data from the next decade without fundamental change. Another major change is that the volume now ends with the rise of civilization and no longer includes the very rich and complex period of ancient history after about 1000 BC. The reasons for this are 3 independent books, all published by Yale University Press under its Early Chinese Civilizations series, for which I serve as general editor, that deal with the Shang, Western Chou, and Eastern Chou civilizations, respectively. So there is a sort of mythological dynasty before the Shang dynasty, but then the Shang is the first one where we have record. We even have writing from it, entirely Bronze Age, that gave way to the Western Chou dynasty, and then at some point that moved eastwards, and at the latter part of the Eastern Chou dynasty, iron implements were starting to show their appearance, but those were mainly considered Bronze Age. And then I think 221 is when the Qing dynasty comes into play, 221 BC, I guess. And that is a clear demarcation for students of the period or of China. And so given that these books are supposed to be so drastically different, I thought to myself, what I probably should do is read the old version, because where he says, the new book no longer includes the very rich and complex period of ancient history after about 1000 BC. I want to read what K.C. Chang has to say about that. His writing is good. His writing is going to help me. So why would I not want to read that? And I posted my dilemma, and one of you very kindly said, you probably should just do it because you're going to regret it if you don't. And that is exactly the truth. You have to take opportunities when they show themselves. And I have the opportunity. I have all of those books. And I was intending to read a couple of them anyhow. So my hope is, though there may have to be a little bit disorder to this, but my hope is after I finish early Chinese civilization to read the Archeology of Ancient China, the book which I have had since my early days working up in Evanston. Follow that with the later edition. It's still 40 years outdated, so this will be 50 years outdated. This will be 40 years outdated. But I would like to read older history by a writer who I trust and who I can ingest, as opposed to something newer by a writer that I'm skeptical about, or just his writing style doesn't gel with me. His or her, I should say. So that is the case. And then I will go into the other books in this series, which I, over the years, acquired. And I'm not sure, they were hard to get, some of them. And of course, I kept my eye and did manage to get them. And so that would entail, after that, for me, a reread of K.C. Chang's book about Shang Civilization. I read it before, and I think now I am at a stage where I'm still not going to, a lot is going to escape me, but I am at a better phase. I understand a little bit more about the Anyang archaeological dig and so forth. I think I can make good with this. And as I say, I'm not in a position where having a thoroughgoing knowledge of any of this is critical to me. It's just, I'm curious, and I like K.C. Chang's writing. He was my third historian, after all. And sad to note, while he was still alive at the time I bought that first book, bought and read, he died at the lamentably early age of 69. Of Parkinson's disease, which is very sad. When you become an old person like me and you come across things like that, it's just sort of crushing to read, even though we are all subject to all of these things. And in my case, I don't think I would call 69 a lamentably early age to die. But so that would be succeeded then by Western Chou Civilization. So this was apparently edited by Casey Chang. I don't think there's any credit. I never knew it was edited by him. I just got this because I felt it was probably a companion to this book, which he translated. And I'm sure that was the impetus behind my finding this and collecting it. I mean, it's kind of odd that they used the different transliteration systems. I guess it was on a per author basis. I don't know. I have come to realize, because I began life as a staunch Wade Giles adherent and a detester of Pinyin, I have come to realize that if you are going to go into China studies, you might as well be conversant with both. I mean, of course, it would be better if I were conversant with Chinese itself, but I do the best I can. So this was translated by Chang, and I don't think I ever really noticed that it starts with the Qin dynasty. So that obviously takes me across the 221 dividing line. And then Yale also has this book, which it's another one of those books I just came across some kind of way, not even realizing, I think, what I was getting. But I see there on the back, it says general editor. I mean, this, until I read that, I didn't realize. I mean, I haven't looked at these things closely. So it'll be a reinterpretation of the Han Dynasty, which, as I say, was included in that first book by Mark Edward Lewis. And the Mark Edward Lewis book is more recent, so I am following a more recent book with an older book. But regardless, I will be more familiar, and I am sure that I can take things with a grain of salt, if not even just recognize disparities. And there is nothing that says the books that I read by Mark Edward Lewis have to be the last word. But we'll see how things go. But so it seems appropriate to do that, and then to close out with a rereading of the first book, which I read by Casey Chang. And this is different. This is indeed Harvard University Press. Crocs and Brentanos. '89, so that I'm guessing the 89 is the year 1089. So that puts it into the right period, I would guess. And here's the guy who invented writing. I use that as my icon, or my avatar, I think is the word, for many years. So a reread of that. At the tail end of this, I might get a lot more out of it now than I ever did. So, and that could well mark the close of my reading about Chinese antiquity. But I also have this. Now this, if you remember, I went through the contents of this book. There was an essay about food in ancient China. And this book came out a year after that essay, or about a year after that. And so he writes the first two essays, and the others are by separate hands. And it might be worth dipping into this occasionally as I make my way through the other things. You can't really study China without talking about food culture. So that is just a, again, overlong chat about how my year is proceeding in these first 6 days and where I think I am off to. The Traven is really nourishing me. As I say, I think he is our greatest unsung American novelist. The Parkman is just a genuine surprise. The topic of the French and English in North America is of perennial interest, unlike that of Henry Adams, who is only talking about the somebody just got a swat. The administrations of Jefferson and Madison. I think if your interest is in understanding the United States, then having some kind of understanding of the War of 1812 is pivotal, and you get that from Henry Adams. But I don't think with the imminent change in our political system, I mean, it already has changed. I don't think the study of the United States as such is of such relevance as it may once have had. So, but the Parkman is going to continue to remain relevant for a long time, besides being an easier read than Henry Adams. And then, of course, all of my stuff with Chang, and that's going to be the hardest part of this triad, simply because it's harder reading. Archaeology is not my forte, nor is anthropology. But I'm going to make my way forward to the best of my ability. I have the books. This is a window of opportunity. And then we'll see what happens. Next year, who knows? I have all of the ancient Greek and Roman historians. Maybe one day I will decide to read them as well. But that's thinking too far ahead, and it will still nevertheless have to be as my mood takes me. So thank you very much for stopping by my channel.